Hello and welcome to Interest. My name is Lisa Lambert.
And my name is Rick Kitagawa, and thanks for joining us for our show about the most valuable asset today, trust.
Today we're joined by Ryan Flahive, a learning technology and publishing executive, entrepreneur, and podcaster. Ryan, welcome to the show.
It is so good to join two of my favorite thought leaders and creatives. A real honor to be here.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for the kind words. So to get started, for folks who are just meeting you for the first time, could you share a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Right now, I primarily define myself as the father of two young girls, and that really defines the mission that I've taken on. And it's a trifecta, really. Three things that I take very seriously: climate, health, and education. And I've been really lucky to have had a very extensive career in education in particular, with a little dabbling in climate. But over the last year, I've been given an opportunity to really focus on climate, and that now more recently during the pandemic on health. So I'm a mission-driven entrepreneur. I really hope to become a thought leader and solution innovator in all three areas that I'm so interested in being impactful in.
I think you're already there from the work that we've seen, and I'm really excited for what's to come with that. So I'd love to take a moment and focus a little bit on one of your newer roles over at SimTutor, and focus a little bit on what that role is about, what that opportunity is about, and what's the change you're making there.
Sure. At SimTutor, we're really taking on online learning in a new way, really making it interactive and focusing on disciplines where students have to learn a lot of procedures. So for example, our main product, SimTix, focuses on allied health learners. So we work with medical assistants, sonographers, x-ray technicians, radiographers, et cetera, to help them practice the clinical experience that's so important for them to become professionals. Now, during COVID, a lot of the clinical opportunities that they'd usually have open and available have shut down. So we are stepping in as a very unique provider of this procedure-based clinical training online. And it's been really exciting to see how much of an impact we can have. And one of the things that I look forward to in the coming months is figuring out where we're going to fit in post-COVID. Because what we've seen is the efficacy of this hybrid learning approach, where students don't just spend all of their clinical time in a clinical space, but rather have an opportunity to learn in a simulated environment before they go into that clinical space, is really critical. And even when these clinical spaces open up at the community colleges and teaching hospitals, there'll be social distancing. So it's really going to be high stakes time that they have in those simulation labs. And when I say simulation labs there, it's usually mannequins, like three-dimensional simulations, whereas ours are completely browser-based. And what we've seen is that a lot of our students have come into their clinical time, once those labs opened up, far more prepared than they ever were in the traditional setup. And then the second part of that is SimTutor. So SimTutor is the broader umbrella company. SimTutor has a product called SimTutor Author that makes it really easy for any discipline to create procedure-based training. So we're looking at disciplines like HVAC repair or automotive repair. We're doing a lot of work in the medical device space, where sales reps used to go into surgery with the surgeons to show how their medical device might be put into the human body. That's not happening anymore. So they're using SimTutor Author to teach, give people the opportunity to demonstrate that they've learned, and then also to create high stakes environments where students and learners are tested.
This to me sounds like a real paradigm shift for the learners that you're working with, and moving them for something that was in person over to the virtual environment. And I'm curious how you've enrolled students into that journey and build confidence with them that the training they'll be getting in a virtual environment is going to meet or exceed what they would be getting if they were one-on-one or in person with others.
That's a great question. And frankly, I can't take a whole lot of credit for that yet because I'm still relatively new. But my colleagues who have been at the company for a long time have done a fantastic job of demonstrating that they can be trusted, that our products are very good, that they're high quality, that learners can demonstrate in the real world that they've learned the procedures and skills that they need to be effective. And frankly, during COVID, we've gone through some massive growth, and it's almost entirely word of mouth. So, that's the best kind of advertising. We're just now getting caught up with a lot of the business that we've gained during COVID because of that word of mouth. And, just now kind of figuring out, okay, now who are we and how are we going to market ourselves? And a big part of that for me is getting in front of customers. As a product developer, I've always felt it's important to get out of the bubble and talk to customers. And so just this week, I've talked to four actual students who, started their training in March not knowing that their schools were going to be shut down and using our product and, getting their feedback, their candid feedback. What's exciting is, having been in the education market for a while, it's pretty hard to get good feedback from students. They usually like to complain and criticize you. This has been an entirely different experience. And then also over the past couple of weeks, I've talked to 25 plus instructors who adopted our products. And again, not to sell them. I want to learn how their experience can be improved, how we can make our platform more effective, how we can create new content that would be really valuable to them. But the feedback has been incredibly positive. And so again, I can't take credit for that. My teammates who've been at the company for a long time have earned that trust and respect over a long period of time. And I hope to help continue it and help build that tradition.
That sounds super awesome. And it sounds like a really great product as well. I think I can see maybe a through line of how this work is sort of meaningful to you, given the background that I know about you. But could you maybe share with people, why is it important?
Yeah, I'll give you a concrete example. So one of the new products that we're working on right now is basically respiratory care for first responders. So it's dealing with the number one issue, of the day, which is COVID response. And it's exciting. And we're partnering with Mizzou, the University of Missouri. They've given us access to their simulation lab. And so my people have been there filming with a 360 camera. And we're looking at ways to fast track the training for, respiratory therapists, but also medical assistants that may be dealing with respiratory care. We're looking at getting into nursing for respiratory care. So that's one example that's just straight out of the headlines. But at the same time, this is a growing marketplace. So it's an important market for a number of reasons. One is there's jobs. And as you know, unemployment's a critical issue. And so I'm looking at working public-private partnerships, I live in Colorado, working with the state of Colorado to help them with their bridge between workforce development and the big hospitals who are identifying who they need to hire over the next 2 years. So it's about creating jobs. It's real skills that are going to be critical to, our parents as they're aging. And again, as I said, I primarily define myself as the father of these two young girls and hoping that they can, live and thrive in a healthy Colorado, a healthy United States of America, a healthy world where they have all of the medical care that they need.
That's amazing. Amazing. You've mentioned trust a couple of times now, and a lot of your work with SimTutor and before that has been very much working with people and collaboration and partnerships. And I'd love to know, how has trust come into play in your change making, both at SimTutor and in all your many other endeavors?
Well, I hope that when people I've worked with throughout my career they think of me as the guy who jumps into the fire when there's a problem, who goes directly to customers when there's issues. And that's kind of multi-level, multi-stakeholder problem solving. In that, you have customers. It's easy to walk away from the customer who's complaining and who your product failed. I think it's important, first of all, to acknowledge the problems you've created for them. So for example, years and years ago, I launched or was part of a big team that launched a new platform. I don't even know how many tens of thousands of classes had adopted it, but it didn't work in, the first day of classes across the country. And, as the owner of a product line then, geography and geology, I had to jump in and I reached out to all the customers and I made myself very available. And that built me some very strong relationships with those customers that, pays dividends today, even though I'm no longer in that field. And just as important, and again, I hope this is how I'm remembered by the sales force, as the guy who made their lives easier, because they didn't create this problem. My production team, my editorial team, to some extent did create this problem. So having sales reps know that they have product team members who will step into the fire, talk directly to their customers, apologize, take ownership, and articulate a solution, I think is just key. Luckily, in my new company, we haven't had that issue. I've got an amazing engineering team. Our CTO is incredible. He built the product from scratch. And so we haven't had to deal with customer service issues like that. But I'm hoping that through my customer outreach, I can build relationships outside of the company and then demonstrate to people inside of the company that I really care, that I'm honest, that I'll take ownership when things go wrong and it's my fault and the buck stops here. But most important, that we're in it together. And I believe in creating a culture of trust and customer-centered innovation and multi-stakeholder decision-making.
That sounds amazing. And I love that you're kind of describing this ideal that you have of really being willing to step into the fire. And I think that we've seen that a lot in leaders who are really building trust. And so I'd love to have your take. What else have you learned about trust along your very multifaceted, multidisciplinary career journey?
One element of my career journey that's kind of defined it since 2008 is that I've worked remote. And when I went remote, I worked for a company that had around 5,000 employees, and not that many of them were remote. Now I work for a company that's entirely remote. And a lot more people have found themselves in that situation for obvious reasons. And trust is key when you're working remote. First of all, you have to trust yourself that you're going to get up in the morning and do the work that needs to get done, that you're going to prioritize. You have to have team members that you can trust that are going to do the same, and they have to trust you as well. So that's, been critical to my success. And frankly, as a lifestyle, I can't imagine going back to working in an office because I love working remote. I live in a great town, Boulder, Colorado, where I can just jump on my bike at lunch and, go on an adventure, but know that time is actually going to make me more productive when I get back. But again, not to beat a dead horse, I think that the most important thing that I've learned is that you need to have customers who trust you, because customers are key. Without customers, you don't have a business. And to get customers to trust you, both to buy your product, at another level, to be honest with you and tell you the things you need to hear. So for example, in publishing, we do a lot of reviewing. And it's easy to find reviewers who are going to tell you what you want to hear all of the time. And that feels really good until you see your sales numbers at the end of the year. What you really need is the customers who are going to tell you what you need to hear. And the same goes for colleagues. I had a situation early on in my new position at SimTutor where I may have made a decision, kind of a brash decision about some user experience and design issues without bringing everyone in as I should have. And I had to take a step back, take a deep breath. One thing I love about this company is we can move quickly. So I made this decision and it was done. And then people saw it. And then I had to backtrack, and I had to not so much apologize, but tell everybody how I got to where I was, and then give them an opportunity to express why they disagreed. And for me to then take a step back and make another decision and take a different path forward. So a lot of it is trusting yourself enough that you can say that you're wrong, and to trust your colleagues enough to really listen to what they have to say and taking a different path forward.
I really like how you've really focused on this idea of building the trust in yourself to admit when you're wrong. I think that's a really crucial step in building trust, especially with others. And I'm super curious, just how do you feel like you've been able to cultivate that? Because I know a lot of people have a lot of tension around being able to, especially as a leader, to be able to admit that they're wrong. How do you feel that you might have cultivated that trust within yourself?
Well, I won't lie. Kids are really good training for acknowledging that you're wrong quite often. And marriage is another example of that. I know that when I was a young editor, I had a really big ego, and I had a very difficult time acknowledging I was wrong, and watching how people respond to that versus acknowledging that you're human and that you're in a position where you're given the space to take risks, which means that you should have the space to make mistakes and be wrong. And that's something I've valued throughout my career, and especially value now in my current position.
I'd love to expand on that to your collection of different projects coming into that, from the Climate Changers podcast to the work you've done with in the energy space, to developing Tonic, a whole bunch of different endeavors on that side. I'm curious if across your endeavors, you've noticed any patterns in how trust has come into play to help you move forward.
Especially in the last 2 years, I've taken a lot of chances with new projects. That includes my tonic syrup company that you mentioned. It includes my podcast, Climate Changers. It includes a startup that I'm working on right now called Cow Tipping. And a lot of it goes back to some central themes that you guys talk about a lot around navigating uncertainty. So uncertainty is kind of the only thing that's certain right now. And I've had to really trust myself, and it hasn't always worked, and I haven't always trusted myself through these endeavors. I had a really great opportunity over the last year before I joined SimTutor to really work on my own creative projects as I wanted to. And I set myself up to, as you mentioned, get into the clean energy sector. And in late February, early March, I had a lot of momentum heading that direction. And then COVID hit and all of those opportunities disappeared. And so I had a couple of weeks where I was sort of freaking out and wondering if all this trust I'd put in myself in terms of life design and kind of following my dreams was a mistake. And if instead I should have gone back to my traditional, work in publishing. But then I have to say, I was surprised. I had, my dream job come to me seemingly out of nowhere and start on the very last day of my severance from my prior position. And that feeling of being able to say to myself that I did make the right decision after weeks of really doubting myself and beating myself up was incredible and was really transformative for me. So like I said, the only thing that's certain is uncertainty, and we have to take risks and trust in ourselves. And you guys have provided a great toolkit for people to do so. I took a number of your workshops during some of the high times and some of the low times in my year of creative endeavors. And I highly recommend to anybody that they really look closely at those toolkits, because there's a lot there to work with.
Well, thank you so much for the generous testimonial that, by the way, listeners, we did not ask for. This is just Ryan's generosity on display here. So Ryan, any kind of going forward from that, from the toolkits, I mean, you're such a masterful expert in building trust yourself. I feel like we can learn a lot from you. And so I'd love to know, especially with uncertain times, building new things, being new to a role, what practical advice would you give a leader that's really looking to make a positive impact?
Well, again, as I said earlier, I'm very customer focused. First thing is to go out and talk to customers. Well, I take that back. First thing is to listen to your, new colleagues and learn as much as you can from them, and use that to frame the questions that you want to use as you go after customers. One of the other lessons I've learned this year, and I have to thank my mom for this because she's super brave and isn't afraid to ask anybody anything. But with my podcast, I've been relatively fearless in who I'll ask to be on my podcast. And I've almost never had anyone say no. I've had a few people, just a couple people, ignore me altogether. But I've been really lucky to have thought leaders like Bill McKibben and Alan Savory and Seth Godin and just so many amazing people on my podcast, even though I'm an amateur in many ways. So that's been great. And one of my projects today is going after Jane Goodall. So Jane, if you're listening, expect to hear from me. When I first moved to Boulder, my wife and I were lucky enough to see Jane speak at the local elementary school, which happens to now be my kids' elementary school, which happens now to be fully distance education. And so one of the things that I want to do with Jane is get her to answer a bunch of the kids' science questions on my podcast and use that as a way to launch their engagement in her Roots and Shoots project. But it's a long-winded way of answering your question, which is just trust yourself to go after somebody and talk to somebody, because it's amazing who will actually respond. And I've had a lot of luck with that so far. So I think that's part of it. And that goes back to, reaching out to customers, just being fearless. And, you want to make sure you're not stepping on the toes of your sales reps. But if they've given you permission to reach out to people and talk to them, and don't feel like you have to be over-prepared, and engage with people as humans. And if you don't have an answer, admit that, but tell them you'll get the answer. I think that that's where a lot of my success, and frankly, most of my enjoyment from my work has come, is from engaging with people at a human level, trusting myself that if I show up, I won't make a fool out of myself. I still do sometimes, but, trusting most of the time I won't, and just talking to people. And they don't take the credit for it, but I've just had some incredible bosses who worked really hard to make me successful, put me in the forefront, let me get the awards, and they know the entire time that award is for them and it reflects well on them. And I've tried to take that model with my employees and understand where they want to go with their career, help them get there, and get them in front of people, get them presenting in front of senior management, get them in front of customers so that they can grow, because that growth then reflects I'm not doing it because it reflects well on me. It makes me feel good and it's good to see for its own sake, but that's really how you get successful. The people who are in it all for themselves, that shows pretty quickly. And you can hear when people are talking behind their backs, how that reflects on them.
Something I really admire about you is you are definitely more curious than you are afraid. And that curiosity has led you to some really interesting endeavors and really interesting projects. And I'd love to know what's coming up for you.
Well, I'm very excited. So after this interview, I actually have a pitch rehearsal with this group called Sage around a product that I initially pitched at a Techstar startup weekend called cow tipping, and it was accepted. I got to work with an awesome team, and since then I've had a lot of great coaching from Techstars, from the Institute for Entrepreneurship at CSU, from 1 Million Cups, which is related to the Kauffman Foundation, and now with Sage. And what I'd really like to do is figure out a way to combine carbon offsets and carbon sequestration with carbon farming and regenerative agriculture, and find the solution for what I call carnivorous environmentalists. So that's basically those of us who eat beef but care about climate and therefore feel guilty about it. And there's some really interesting science. And if you listen to my podcast, I have an episode coming up next week with Alan Savory, and he's probably the premier thought leader. But I've got Joel Salatin, I've got a number of other people who have talked really eloquently about this. But this goes against everything we think we know, but cattle are actually a big part of the solution to climate change. And so this idea that we can take something that we think of as bad and we feel guilty about and turn it into a solution for, the biggest environmental problem we face, and certainly, one of the two biggest problems we face altogether right now, is really exciting. So I'm real excited about that. But most important, giving 110% to my new role at SimTutor. This is just a great company. We have this unique opportunity to grow right now, and I feel very lucky to have an awesome team and just to be part of this really amazing experiment in how we're going to transform online learning.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ryan. This has been great. And you have some amazing interviews up on your podcast. Where can people find out about you, your projects? Definitely plug your podcast. And if they want to know more about the work that you're doing and the change that you're making.
Thank you. I need to update my ryanflahive.com website. So I'll do that today in case anyone goes there. So you'll find everything. LinkedIn is just a great way to connect with me. I think LinkedIn is one of the most powerful tools available right now for connecting with people in a meaningful way. I don't syndicate all of my podcasts there, but every once in a while I do. And then Climate Changers, the podcast, is available on pretty much any podcast app. And if you're interested in cow tipping, it's cowtipping.co. I apologize, it's not .com, but cowtipping.co. There's some information there, and I'm offering some free offsets to people who want to kind of try it out and be part of my minimum viable audience.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ryan, especially with all the things you have on the go. Most of all, being a dad to two amazing little girls.
Well, thank you guys for the opportunity. I think the work you do is so incredibly valuable and timely right now, and it's an honor to be part of your podcast.
Thanks again, Ryan. And all right, everyone, thank you so much to you for listening. And if you found this conversation useful, please join us again next time for In Trust.
Thanks for listening to the In Trust podcast. And if this resonated with you, be sure to subscribe or follow and leave us a review. We would also love for you to share with a friend, because after all, trust is an infinite game and it's better together. And now, a quick word from our sponsors.
The move to working from home hasn't been easy for everyone, and if this is you, we have a solution. Over at Spotlight Trust, we're happy to introduce the Reimagining Remote Virtual Studio. This is the most comprehensive, people-centered program for leading a virtual work experience that builds trust, belonging, and engagement. You'll walk away from the virtual studio with practical, actionable ways to lead your people forward into a lasting, more human, remote future. Enrollment is now open, and today is the best day to sign up to secure one of the limited spots at the lowest price. The workshop starts October 25th, So go now to spotlighttrust.com/reimagining-remote to learn more and enroll now. That's spotlighttrust.com/reimagining-remote. We'll see you in the studio.